Hey guys, so obviously apologize for the issues there. It just kind of disrupts the lesson, and I think the video is definitely going to just be much easier, more clear, and more efficient. So again, I've already had a few emails from students, which is great. So if you have any questions, please just shoot me an email. But hopefully, me going over these questions now kind of clears some things up. So here's what I asked you to. I said, look, here's some homework problems last night. You didn't have to turn it in, but I'm happy to see and hear that a lot of you tried to do these last night. All right, so I'll go through each one, and at the end of the video, I'll give you a clear idea of what to expect tomorrow. Okay, so we need to know how to solve by factoring, right? And again, we should always ask ourselves: is there a GCF? Can we factor something out to make things easier? That's not the case here, right? Now, 10 is not prime. So you might have said, all right, well, let me think about factors of 10, like 5 and 2 and 10 and 1, right? But I'll start with just 5 and 2, just less numbers in front of me. But if these don't work, I'll try 10 and 1. So we need to somehow get an 11. We know the signs of our parentheses here, all right? They are going to be different because the last term here is negative, right? Multiply diagonally, and it looks like we'll get 25 and 14. 25 and 14 can give us an 11. So 5x and 2x are the first terms. The 7 is going to go here. The 5 is going to go here. If we need a positive 11, then the 25 needs to be positive, minus 14. Right? And at this point, a quick FOIL, just in my head, assures me that I factored correctly. All right, but we're solving here. So our answer is going to be x equals, and it's going to be x equals 7/5 and negative 5/2, right? Remember, right over left and change the sign. All right. The next question I like because it is a little different just in how it looks, but let's stick with what we know. We're asked to solve by square rooting both sides. So I know that I have to isolate whatever is being squared, get that by itself. So we're going to add 5 to the other side. Now we take the square root. We know 20 does break down, right? 20 has a perfect square factor. It's 4. So a 2 will come out. The 5 stays underneath, right? Always have plus or minus. Now, this is where it looks a little different. We're not used to seeing this like coefficient in front of x, but no big deal. Let's just kind of think about what we need to do. We need to solve for x, right? So I need to subtract 1. I can't combine anything because that 2 has the radical attached to it. So it's just negative 1 plus or minus 2 root 5. And lastly, we would just divide by 3. And you divide the whole thing by 3. And think about this unit on quadratics, right? When we factor, our answers never look like this. But sometimes when we do quadratic formula, right, our answer could look like this. And that's good. Like this just shows that, here we go. Here's a situation when we took the square root of both sides and we got an answer that looks like this. That's fine. All right. The next way would be completing the square. And the one that I included here has a leading coefficient of something other than 1. So we know we're going to eventually have to factor that out. All right, we're going to focus on our setup. And we know that 21 has to get added to the other side. And I'm going to put those blank lines in there. Factor out of 3. All right, and it's this step where we will complete the square. We will take half of 2 and square it. So a 1 goes here. And we know 1's not going to go here because we took out a 3, right? Anytime you take out a number, the numbers on the lines will be different. 3 times 1, 3 goes on that side. All right, we should not have issue factoring this trinomial, right? Factors of 1 that give me 2. It's x plus 1 and x plus 1, but we just write it as x plus 1 squared, right? Get what's being squared by itself, which means we got to divide by 3. And now take the square root of both sides. And we haven't done an example with the negative underneath the radical yet. Well, haven't done one today. But remember, if that happens, we just have an I in our answer somewhere. So think about how 8 breaks down. Again, a 4 is a factor of 8, so a 2 will come out, and a 2 stays underneath. And lastly, just subtract 1. All right. All right, the most recent problem that we've kind of done together in class, which was yesterday, right? We talked about solving systems of equations. I gave you all the steps to kind of follow, which I know definitely helps a lot of us. And the first step was make sure each equation is set to y equals. All right, this one is. Once both equations read y equals, you then take the equations and you set them equal to one another. All right, so we'll take both equations here. Set them equal to one another. And now we group like terms. We bring everything to one side. We get it set to 0. Because the x squared is negative, I'm going to choose to bring everything to the right. Right? So I'm going to add that to the other side. I'll subtract 4x, which I think gives me negative 2x. And I'll add 1, which would give me negative 4. So at this point, we could start factoring, or somebody might realize, well, you know what? We can actually factor out a 2 or divide by 2. Same deal, because we're solving. So either one would work. And maybe make it a little easier on ourselves to factor. Right? Factors of 2 that can give me negative 1. Right? That's not hard. Just got to be x minus 2 and x plus 1. All right. We continue to solve for x. And we have 2 and negative 1. Right? Except this is not our answer. Okay, so many times students think that we're done after we solve for x because we just did that in the 3 previous problems, right? But with the system, you're solving for points. You're finding where the quadratic and the line intersect. And if they intersect, they're going to intersect at a point, x and y. What you found at this point is the 2x values. So one at a time, we're going to plug them in to this equation because it would be easier than this one. We'd get the same result, but it would be a little easier to plug it in to the line. All right, so plug in 2 for x, and we get negative 1. Right, which means that when x is 2, y is negative 1. So that's an answer of ours. Then we're going to do it again, and this time we're going to plug in the other x value that we got, negative 1. That's going to be negative 7, which means when x is negative 1, we got y to be negative 7. And again, this is another answer of ours. This means this quadratic, right, and that line intersect at 2 points. And we just found the 2 points that they intersect at, okay? All right, let's go over something else that I touched on yesterday. let's say we did everything, we set the equations equal to one another, and we got something like this. And we said, all right, well, now we got to try to factor it, but we realize it doesn't factor. All right. And that could happen on your quiz. And what I want you to do is this. If that happens, I want you to think about doing just what's called the discriminant, which means just look at b squared minus 4ac, right? What we know is underneath of the radical when we do the quadratic formula. And if we do this, right, if we plug in a, b, and c, we would get a negative 19. And the fact that we got a negative number there tells us, right, that these lines do not intersect at a real number, right? Remember, this would be underneath the radical, which means a negative number tells us we would have an I, which means this quadratic does not intersect the line, all right? It doesn't intersect it at a real number. That's what an imaginary number tells us, all right? When you solve this system, if you get an imaginary, the answer here would be no solution. All right, so here's what you need to make sure you understand how to do. You do everything we just did in the previous problem. You get to this step and you think, all right, well, wait, it doesn't factor. Okay, if it doesn't factor, does that mean I would get a negative underneath the radical? So when I do b squared minus 4ac, if I get a negative, that simply tells me my answer to this problem is no solution, right? Because our answers are what? Our answers are intersection points. Well, this one doesn't intersect, so it's no solution. All right. Real quick, what to expect tomorrow? Well, there's going to be 4 questions, all right? And not in the whole test, but there will be 4 questions to start. And I'm going to ask you to say, all right, you have to solve by the 4 methods. All right. So first question, you need to solve by factoring. Next question, you need to solve by square roots. The third question, you need to solve by completing the square. And finally, the 4th question, you would need to solve by quadratic formula, which I will give you. All right. Then there's going to be about probably 2 questions. And I'm just going to say, look, the directions are to solve by a method of your choice. All right. So you have to factor, you have to square root, you have to complete the square, you got to do quadratic formula. But the next 2 questions are just going to be, hey, solve. And you choose. And you might say, well, I'm going to factor this one. Or I think I'm going to do completing the square. Or maybe I could just real quick take the square root of both sides. So use your judgment, okay? You might not be wrong, like if you choose one as opposed to the other. You just might be less efficient if you did, all right? It might just take you an extra step or 2. No big deal. And then finally, depending on the length, you're either going to have 1, possibly 2 system questions. All right. And that's like the one we just did and the problems that we did yesterday, right? So there it is. You're probably going to have about 7 or 8 questions. Once I take the quiz, I'll get a better feel for how long it is. And then I'll either say, okay, we're good with 8, or maybe have to scale it back. All right. But guys, listen, if you have questions, let me know and I will gladly answer them. All right. Enjoy the rest of your day. I'll talk to you tomorrow.